Hey, welcome to Cinema Gulp. I'm Ben. I'm here with Kat. We're talking Guardians of the Galaxy 3.
I really like that it's like a different genre film. Like each one has been like the first one is like classic throwback to Star Wars. It's basically what it is,
Yeah.
the original. And then the second one is kind of like more of a meditative movie about family and legacies and stuff like that. The third one is just an action film from start to finish. There's like no
Yeah.
exposition to this movie. They just jump right in. And yeah, it has a admittedly seemingly video game mission side quest type plot to kick it off, but you love it because of the characters and the dynamic that they
There's a,
have.
there's a cold open that sets things in motion,
Yeah,
but not really a plot set in motion yet.
yeah, and the story really comes from all the flashbacks, which I thought they chose the right moments to put them in there, and I was surprised that they worked so well given the levity and the humor and the rest of it, because this does feel like a classic fun, zany Guardians of the Galaxy type movie. Like, I don't get why people are saying it's super dark, and it's not really that at all. I like the characters, but I did notice that it never lets up. Like, it keeps you engaged, hitting the accelerator from start to finish. You don't feel the runtime at all.
My favorite thing about this movie is the soundtrack, because I love James Gunn soundtracks and I've loved the Guardian soundtracks. This one was so much my style. So it has Space Hog and Flaming Lips, and it even like jumps into things more modern like Florence and the Machine, which I do like. I thought the action was great. I did think it stepped up. The MCU stepped up the game as far as like not looking like volume CGI renders. I mean, you still had Rocket looking fantastic, and it felt like nowhere was a set and some of the other places were a set. I'm loving the progression of every character. I know, again, just like what you were saying, there's people like saying like, well, this movie's not about anybody except Rocket, but then Rocket's like not a part of this or whatever. I disagree. Like, every character in this movie, just like the other Guardians movies, have so much depth and so much stuff going on internally. Especially like Nebula is like one of the characters that's just stood out for me for years now, like specifically Endgame, just completely like rearranging the structure of her mindset and turning into kind of a hero from a villain.
Okay, he's in the flashbacks, but for like a huge chunk of this movie, we don't get like Rocket as we know him, and it's like, when's it coming? It's like you're kind of waiting for it to come in a way, because it's like, it's Rocket. You got to have Rocket. The design of the film too, and the different places that we get to see.
Love them. Like that planet that's made of like human flesh or whatever. Like,
yeah, the weird flesh with the vortex like hanging in the middle, and it's just so bizarre. And you see that it's apparently he has like the the brain fluid of the Celestials in there that he uses for whatever. And it's kind of that thing I like about it too. Like his spaceship, the high evolutionary ship. It's like, at first it looks like a pyramid, but then in other formations it'll look like a cube, and it just kind of it shifts around like a Rubik's cube or a different type. It's kind of neat that way. I also like that they keep things mysterious with the characters. Like, we don't really know much about who this villain is or where he comes from or where he gets his resources from. But at the same time, he seems to be like well known in his pocket of the universe.
And he doesn't seem feared. Like, he's not set up as somebody that people know as a villain. People
Right.
know him as something else. We know him as a villain because we're shown it, and in those flashback stuff, you definitely get a depiction of how awful and evil and horrific he is. But he's not set up like where he's in this hovering ship as a bad guy. Like, no one really thinks of him that way.
Like, even at one point in the movie, Rocket specifies, save the higher life forms, which I thought was surprising that he of all people would say that. And that must be the way others have thought about it. But that's like, I like how his backstory kind of reorients things that happened in the previous movies. It's like, oh, that's why he stole the batteries.
Yeah. There's a lot of stuff.
The cross-cutting between the storylines, I just feel that it really held my attention the whole way through. Like, I never got bored with it.
Now is a good time to maybe move into a slight spoiler section. Kat, you like the movie. I like the movie, right?
Yep.
Okay, so we both like the movie. So now you know that, so we're going to move into spoilers. I think the reason that the high evolutionary is so menacing in this movie is it's not necessarily what he does. It's the way he talks I hate seeing animal suffering or
Yeah.
cruelty, but this was more of the mental part where the High Evolutionary was toying with Rocket's emotions, where there's a scene where he's kind of holding him in his lap and he's talking about like the sky and stuff like that. And then, it's getting this little raccoon who's being tortured happy with life for these little tiny moments. Like, oh my God, this is so great. This is going to be worth it. And then I honestly think the darkest, most evil thing that he does is when he laughs in Rocket's face and says, like, oh, like you thought you were coming with me to the new world. I think
Yeah.
they kind of show the High Evolutionary like he's drunk or something. He's kind of stumbling around angry because Rocket's smarter than him. You know the scene I'm talking about? It's like
Yeah.
he's kind of like out of control because Rocket figured something out that he could never figure out. Laughs in Rocket's face and grabs him by the head and says, like, I can't believe you were able to figure this out with this brain, but you couldn't figure out that I'm gonna leave you here. And it's like that stuff just like broke me. It was so sad.
And it was surprising that he got the High Evolutionary had such a hang up about that, because it's like you gave him a higher intellect. That's why he's
Created him for that.
anthropomorphic now.
Yeah.
Yeah, you've made him anthropomorphic, and you've taught him all of these complex math equations and all that. So why is it surprising that he's using that information to figure things out? And
I think that was to show that he's just
what's his ego? He can't
yeah,
stand
he's
the idea that
ego.
Rocket.
He's got an ego, but those scenes are very crucial to the movie and
Yeah.
to the character of Rocket, which to me like is the best like animated realized character maybe in cinema, just from the renderings to Bradley Cooper's decisions on how he decided to do the voice to the writing of the character. I just love Rocket. I love Rocket, and I think he was the heart and soul of this movie, as was Quill. I mean, almost as was Mantis. Like I find that character to be so much more growing on me than that. Well, I mean, like she hasn't had as much time as some of the other characters, but
That they found a way to bring around some of the characters. Like they found a way to bring Drax around to the way he was in the first movie a bit.
yeah,
Like
finally.
Finally, like there's an antecedent to what Drax has been all about and what's been driving him and why he, acting as like a dumb oaf the way that he is, and they bring that back around, which I thought was really good.
Yeah, I was really happy that they finally brought that around and they gave him, because his battle was with Thanos, but then he never really got to defeat Thanos in any way, shape, or form. And in this movie, they kind of redeemed him as a strong man again, whereas in the last couple movies, he just felt like kind of a wuss. Like he didn't really contribute much. Especially in like Infinity War, he did like nothing. In this one, at least you got that moment where he went up against Adam Warlock and he's like, pick on someone your own size. And he got his moment to actually, like, oh yeah, Drax is a strong motherfucker. He's not just goofy Batista. He's got strength. And then obviously the stuff with the kids was so just another great
Oh yeah, the
another
Drax
great
and the kids,
moment.
that was especially because it starts as being like this humorous scene with the translation issue, but then it gets really heartfelt towards the end of that scene, which is like that's really great.
Let's talk about Groot, because Groot looks different. I wasn't bothered by the look of him, even though I always liked the look of him from the first Guardians movie the most.
I find it interesting that this Groot seems to be the most intelligent of all the Groots.
Definitely.
In the first
Yeah.
movie, in the first one, I like the look of Groot in the first one the most, but he seemed almost like a child in a way,
Yeah.
who then becomes a lot more mature or adult during the climax when he decides to sacrifice himself and becomes like a badass and stuff. Like the baby Groot thing was like, okay, it's a one act thing that they just keep playing because, oh, cutesy. And I just hated him in Infinity War, Endgame, and Love and Thunder. It just, I don't like the teen, annoying Groot. It's like, yeah, he has his moment when he sacrifices his arm to use for the axe, and that brief moment when he's getting turned to dust and Rocket is seeing him die. But for the most part, my favorite Groot is still from the first movie.
Me too.
I kind of like that because that allows Rocket to have more of a frequent engagement with him, specifically because Groot is very childlike. Whereas here, Groot is very much his own fully realized character, to the point that Peter would rather trust Groot, which is huge trust and character growth between them. Like, here, you take the guns. You got my 6. You know.
This one's good. I like Groot from the first one and from this one the best. I mean, obviously because they're grown, but I like the dynamic with Quill and Groot in this one, where they, there is a trust and stuff like that, and like that scene where they finally revitalize Rocket, and it's just the three of them, and they, I love that scene so much. I found this movie fucking so fun and funny, and it's got issues, and we'll talk about those, but overall, like I love all three of these movies. I think they're my favorite trilogy of the MCU. I gotta say,
yeah, this is a great trilogy. I was also surprised with the direction the Lila storyline went. I thought that was building to something else entirely, and then it just kind of, oh wow.
That was Linda Cardellini, right?
Yeah.
It's Hawkeye's wife doing the voice. I have a couple of negatives, and I want to bring these up. First one I'm going to talk about, and I'm sure you feel the same way. Adam Warlock is terrible. Like, it's not the actor. It's not Will Poulter. Why is he in this movie?
I know. It's like, because on the one hand, I already went back and saw that there are a bunch of Easter eggs teasing this storyline for, like, the whole High Evolutionary storyline going back in the previous 2 movies. So it's like James Gunn already had this basic plot.
Yeah, but remember, that was before he got fired and rehired, and his movie got shifted from Phase 4 to Phase 5. It might have made more sense originally.
I mean, well, because Phase 4, I mean, and 5 almost feels the same in terms of, because it's kind of going all over the place. Like, I could see that if it was different, if it took place, like, before Infinity War Endgame, but since it's, like, in the timeline that it is, because he had this in mind, but it felt like the whole Adam Warlock tease from Guardians 2, the fact that they buried it deep within the credits is like, okay, maybe Aisha created him for this purpose, but maybe they'll save him for something else. And the fact that he's in this movie, and they just to play him for a dumb laugh.
When you see him in that crypt at the end of Guardians 2 in 2017, you're assuming he's going to fight Thanos in 2 years, and that never happened.
Right, because he's a huge role. He played a big role in the Infinity War comic, and
huge role. Yeah. I think there's a lot of shit on the cutting room floor with that character, where he was a bigger part in Act 3, but then they ultimately said, let's just have the Guardians win the day. Like,
again, the High Evolutionary, at times I felt he was goofy when I felt it needed to be dark. Like, if you're not going to go all the way, which understandably they're not, and showing, like, really getting into how evil this, like, showing it on screen, having him do his little goofy tangent stuff was sometimes a bit, I'm like, really? People are following this guy? I do wonder what kind of the base of his powers are, because he just, doing the things that he does, like when he's able to float down the hallway and just turn into like a laser beam.
There was a couple of characters where their power set I wasn't quite.
Yeah,
this movie was very loose on that shit. Yeah.
Right. Other things is, as much as I like that they brought Drax's story around, I wish that leading up to that they didn't have as much dumb humor along the way. Like, when he's being a badass, like you said, being the destroyer again, let it shine.
And his fake death too. His fake death really.
That too, like fake outs. Like, don't get into the fake out things. The ending. I thought the way they're trying to say the finality of it was a bit forced, in terms of, like, some of the stuff they do with the characters comes out of left field, especially Mantis. It's like, I didn't get the vibe that Mantis felt like she was being bossed around by.
No, she was never being bossed around.
Yeah, not by the Guardians. And it's like, you're a family with them, but we're just going to arbitrarily leave just because. In the beginning, even watching the first movie, it's like he has a whole extended family there in the prologue, and he never had any interest apparently in going back.
And then even when he came back in Endgame, it's like he just left immediately. He didn't try. He's like, hey, I'm on Earth, but he never tried to. Yeah, I kind of like that.
That's right. He did come back to Earth. I forgot about that.
So, yeah, he was on Earth, but just left immediately instead of looking up his family members. Yeah.
Especially since he already kind of had the catharsis over that in the second film when he killed his father and found out about that. It's like all the more reason to go back to Earth. And so I like that they brought that back around for him. And then other things, I feel that maybe putting the Gamora character in this movie was a little forced. It's like James Gunn knows.
I've heard that, but I'm glad she was in it because I liked her.
Yeah, I mean, she was weirdly more hyper aggressive than even in the first movie. Like during the
Well,
whole
remember she came from a timeline where she was still like
right,
like assassin or whatever. So
right, she was, but I mean, she's still in a sense the same as the first movie, where yes, she's a hyper assassin, but even in the first one, she's had ethics, and in this one, it's like she's really brutal. I'm like, I was with Star-Lord the whole time. I was like, Jesus. James Gunn likes to say that Rocket's the protagonist, but he's not. I mean, at least not the way the edit works in all three of these movies. They clearly have been putting.
It's always been Quill,
yeah. It's always been Quill, and yet because this is I feel more of an ensemble piece, leaning heavily on Rocket. The Quill Gamora story and that arc, I think, would work if that was more of the center of attention. But on the side, it's kind of like you keep saying things and bring it up, and they kind of come around a little bit in the end, and then you have the arbitrary thing where they just decide, well, we're all going to break up. It's like just because it's the last of the James Gunn movies doesn't mean everything has to end.
Well, remember, James Gunn did not write Gamora dying in Infinity War. He did not want that to happen. So he had to work with what he had. This movie felt like James Gunn giving them those moments that he wanted to have them fall in love, but he didn't get the opportunity to. But in the end, he made the right decision, in my opinion, to not have them get together, because that would have been stupid. For sure.
That would have been bad.
I love how it ends with her, where she just goes back to the Ravagers and she's just happy. And it's like, I love how this movie ended. I didn't love
the thing though. Like, what if you're Peter? It's like he makes the joke that, oh, my grandpa, he's like 90 years old. He's not gonna be around. I'm like, okay, so you go see him. He probably won't be there. Are you gonna go back and find Gamora? I mean, because Chris Pratt says he's down to do more. The end title says he's gonna come back.
I think Peter's character just wanted to finally go home and connect with somebody from his childhood. That's all.
I mean, the Nebula thing, I haven't really felt as much with that character as everybody else has.
I love Nebula.
This one, it's like, okay, she's gonna decide the raise. It's like, it's good that her ethics have come around, that she's gonna raise all the kids and take care of them, which is good, because that shows that she has come around from how evil she was in the first movie. And so that was really cool. And with like Drax staying to do that as well, that was great.
Yeah, it just shows that Nebula was just damaged. She was never evil. She was just a part of a Thanos like trajectory, like she was just one of those elements to that,
Hands down, my favorite moment in the movie though is when Rocket finds the other raccoons, and he looks at the sign on the wall.
Raccoon.
And, like, you're right. In the movies, he's always knocking on people for calling him raccoon.
Yeah.
And some people might view it. I looked at it as just being really sad when he sees the plaque and realizes that he just came from a zoo, and he sees these other little guys right there, and that's where he eventually gets the idea to put his foot down that everybody's coming with us.
Every single scene with Rocket, one of my negatives is Rocket is not funny in this one, and he's always been one of the funniest characters, but I'm okay with that because every single scene with Rocket in this movie means so much to me, and it's so sweet and endearing and sad and just heart stabbing, but also like Bradley, for everything from Bradley Cooper, but more just like the facial expressions that the animators did on this character, just like, and I know they got a different actor to do his voice as like the young one.
Yeah, they got two different voice actors for the young.
Those guys nailed it. It was just like, I just love Rocket. The entire population of Counter Earth is destroyed, dead. And we meet some of them, and they're sweet, and they're kind. And no one gives a shit when they blow up. Like, it's never made mention of again.
Right. It just kaboom. And then you even have these sad...
You even watch, like, families just, like, explode.
Yeah, like, who was it? Was it Gamora that was in the street? She turns to look, and you see the family, the husband and the wife standing on the lawn.
Yeah, she's running there with the passed out Rocket, and she's just watching families that we've met explode. Yeah. It'd be different if you didn't see anybody and it was just like bombs.
Yeah. But
we're seeing all these people. It's just like Earth, and nobody ever makes mention of it again. It just goes back to fun comedy action. I don't know. That kind of weirded me out a little bit. Number one negative of this movie is that Star-Lord, especially when he needed it the most, what the fuck happened to his helmet and his rocket boots? Because Star-Lord has a helmet. He always plugs his ear, and his thing comes down. That's his signature thing in the comics. It's been in the movies. And when he needed it the most in this movie, he didn't have it. What? Where?
Yeah,
Where did that go? Like,
I can't remember what happened to it in
they
the
never
first
make mention of it. He still has it at the end of Endgame, but this one gave them all these like weird signature outfits that I wasn't
Yeah.
really big on at all.
Yeah,
I loved how they all had their own look.
well, everybody pointed out that the color scheme of those outfits too was like from Rogue One, or I mean, Andor.
And then the fact that he didn't have his like hit the ear and then the face thing comes over and I don't, it's like, what happened to that? Where did it go? Like, why is it not there? So I hated that at the end where like Adam Warlock, this character that you've forgotten about 15 times in this movie, comes back and like saves him somehow. And it's like, I don't know.
Well, he saves him because Groot didn't kill him.
Yeah, I get it. And there's that, well, a lot of people say that line where he says everybody deserves a second chance was James Gunn writing that because they fired him and rehired him. Conjure this up. Your two favorite parts of this movie. Two different scenes that are your favorite parts.
Well, again, Rocket finding the other raccoons and the plaque on the wall. And then Drax when he's talking to the kids through the bars, and then it starts as like a funny thing, and then it brings it around to this really sad, heartfelt thing that was really good.
My favorite scenes when Rocket says, "I'm Rocket Raccoon," and my other favorite scene. Oh my god! And the hallway that corridor scene. That wasn't really a one shot, but it was. One of those shots.
Yeah, they edited it together to look like one. Yeah.
Oh, it's so good. It's so good. The CGI with the practical effects and the stunts and just every character. It was so well done. And like that's all I ask for when it comes to these kind of movies. This movie like recaptured what I loved about Marvel, for so long. Because we hadn't seen a Guardians of the Galaxy movie in 6 years. Like we've seen them in the other movies. But this trilogy, like in a vacuum, is fucking amazing. It's really good, filled with great characters and soundtrack and just action, and I love it so much. I remember when John and I reviewed part 2, because that was the first one we did as a channel, saying like, I don't care if they ever connect with anything in the MCU. And obviously a year later they showed up in Infinity War. And they were great in that. But I'm so glad that their final movie like just has none of that shit. Like it's never mentioned. There's nothing about the MCU that the Guardians mentioned.
They didn't drop in a bunch of other
zero. I love that Peter, because if you remember the first two Guardians movies, Peter and Rocket were always like in a contest for who's the captain. And in this one, it was just Peter trying to save his friend Rocket. So
final thoughts. I love that for the most part it's its own trilogy. It doesn't have a bunch of ties to the other MCU stuff or anything like that. And the only bit of tie-in stuff is something that's explicitly Guardians related and not related to anything other MCU, like its own self-contained thing. I love how this third one kind of retroactively makes you look at storylines and characters from the previous films in a different lens. It was very fun. I love that it's more of an action, like a different genre film. Like each one has been different in that way. Very heartfelt and emotional. Brings it all in. Not as dark as I would have liked it to be for the subject matter that they're using. But very,
despite
very good.
What other critics are saying.
Yeah, despite what other critics are saying. And I hope that doesn't.
So dark.
I hope that doesn't drive people away. It might. Very good movie.
I agree. I love this movie. My only complaint is Benicio del Toro is not in it enough. We drink your cinema.
I drink it up!